She said, "You're not my husband, you can't stop me from going out with my ex." I just said, "Cool," so I stopped acting like one. By the time she got home, her suitcases and favorite clothes scattered outside in the rain. That evening, she came back, her eyes still full of defiance, and uttered the sentence that almost stopped my heart. "You're not my husband. You can't stop me from seeing my ex." I just looked at her, no anger, no pleading, just a slight shrug, and replied, "Cool." That was the moment I realized, from now on, I wouldn't act like a boyfriend anymore. No shouting, no arguing, no begging, just silence, but enough to tell her that the line had been crossed and I would not concede. She walked out, ignoring the pouring rain, ignoring my gaze. I stepped into the room, gathered the things she had left behind, her favorite clothes, suitcases, handbags, and neatly stacked them outside on the yard. It was raining heavily. The clothes were soaked, the suitcases and handbags lying haphazardly on the porch. A few hours later, when she returned, everything was laid out before her eyes, a cold image I had never shown before, and she, for the first time, looked at me with an expression of fear. My name is Ethan, 26, and my girlfriend is Sophie, 25. We've been dating for nearly 3 years, but this relationship, it's completely unbalanced. When we first started, I was genuinely in love with her. I covered almost everything, from romantic evenings and weekend trips to the small gifts Sophie liked. I didn't mind the cost, believing that was what love meant. If she was happy, I was happy, but after a while things started to feel a bit off. Sophie has a part-time job, but she barely ever contributes to shared expenses. I pay the rent, the utility bills, order food, and even buy her things without her asking. I calculated that I have put in at least 3 times more money than Sophie into this relationship. Once I asked her, "Sophie, are you planning on taking care of your own food expenses?" "Oh, yeah, eventually. You can handle it for now," she said, and smiled, as if I should feel good that she was letting me carry the burden. I tried to let it go. I told myself, well, that's love as long as she's happy. But gradually this normalcy began to bother me. Not because of the money, but the feeling of being taken advantage of being disrespected. Sophie started to change, going out with her friends, contacting her ex-boyfriend Jack, wearing more revealing clothes, as if she was testing me. I vividly remember one day when Sophie went clothes shopping. I gave her the money, she took it and smiled. "You always take such good care of me, babe." She was smiling, but her eyes held a hint of defiance, as if to say, "So what if you pay? You can't stop me." I stood there, feeling both proud that she got what she wanted and a little hurt. Jack, the ex-boyfriend, has been showing up more recently. I know Sophie used to love Jack, and I was fine when they were just friends. But now the late-night texts, the long phone calls, the photos they took together, started making me uncomfortable. It wasn't about being controlling, but the feeling of investing so much and being dismissed was stressing me out. One day I gently asked, "Sophie, are you and Jack just friends?" "Yeah, just friends." "Why do you keep paying attention to that?" She smiled. Looking at that smile, my heart felt both sad and angry. Sad because I always cared. Angry because she took my concern for granted. I had invested too much, money, time, emotion. But Sophie didn't seem to notice, or she deliberately minimized it. Every time I gently reminded her, she would just smile or even mock me. "You're too serious." I started to realize all my sacrifices, every time I nurtured this relationship, was no longer appreciated. The breaking point came when Sophie told me, "You are not my husband. You can't stop me from seeing my ex." I stood there feeling like the past 3 years had vanished. I wasn't angry. I didn't cry. I was just empty. All the sacrifices, all the money I spent, all the times I conceded meant nothing now. That statement reminded me that Sophie no longer saw me as important, and from now on, I would no longer act like the easygoing boyfriend. In the following days, Sophie acted like nothing happened, going to see Jack, texting and laughing, even asking me to pay for things she liked. I stood back observing. The feeling was strange and tiring. For the first time, I felt I could hold my boundary, not being the nice boyfriend just to be accepted. One Saturday afternoon, I coincidentally walked past a cafe near my place and saw Sophie sitting with Jack. I recognized them immediately. even from a distance, laughing, leaning close to each other, like two long-lost close friends. Seeing that sight, my heart clenched, but instead of rushing in, I stood still, quietly observing. I told myself, "All right, Ethan, calm down. No need to yell. No need to plead. Just observe." But the sense of unease grew within me. I had invested all this money, time, and emotion, and Sophie was comfortably laughing with her ex as if I didn't exist. When Sophie stepped out of the cafe, still chuckling, I walked over. My voice was deliberately calm. "Sophie, are you happy?" She looked slightly startled, then offered a half-smirk. "You're standing here again?" "Yeah, I'm happy. It was just coffee." "Just coffee?" "The way you were." Leaning close to Jack, laughing like that. I tried to speak, but my words felt weak. Sophie shook her head, her eyes full of defiance. "You are not my husband. You can't stop me from doing anything, Ethan. Go ahead and try, see if you can." That sentence felt like a slap. My heart ached, but this time, instead of getting angry, instead of arguing, I just sighed and smiled faintly. Cool. One word, simple, yet containing the entirety of a silent ending. No shouting, no pleading, just one word. Cool. Sophie paused slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to react that way. That evening I went home, lost in thought. 3 years, everything I had put in. Paying rent, utility bills, buying her clothes, covering weekend trips, small gifts. Now, it seemed, Sophie no longer valued any of it. She was still seeing Jack, texting and joking, comfortably enjoying what I provided. I made a decision, not through words, but through action. For the first time, I wanted to show her the boundary, to make Sophie realize Ethan was no longer the easygoing boyfriend. I walked around the room looking at the clothes, handbags, suitcases, all her favorite things. And a thought flashed through my mind. If she wants to disrespect me, let her see the consequence of that disrespect. But I remained calm, not getting angry, not destroying anything. I simply prepared, arranged everything, and let the heavy rain the next evening do the rest. Every action was calculated. No loss of control, no destruction, just creating the clearest possible message. Watching Sophie lying in bed, texting Jack, chuckling, I sat still, not texting, not calling. I felt a strange strength. Finally, I had found my boundary, and I knew that just one cold action would be enough to make her realize the gravity of the situation. Sophie left the house to meet Jack, leaving me alone in the quiet room. Rain began to fall outside, heavy droplets revealing a gloomy scene. I stood before the pile of clothes, suitcases, and handbags, all her favorite things. Everything I had once spent money on, everything I had meticulously cared for. I wasn't angry. I didn't destroy anything. I just picked up each item, neatly placed it on the porch where the rain was beating down directly. Sophie's leather handbag, the shoes she often wore, her favorite jacket, all were set outside in the torrential downpour. Step by step, I felt a sense of coldness creeping into me. This wasn't revenge. This was a message, clear and forceful. Ethan would no longer tolerate it. I wrote a small note. I heard you. I am not your husband, so from now on I will not act like a boyfriend anymore. All patience has ended. I folded it, placed it on the suitcase, and stepped back. Looking at the scene before me, my heart felt both empty and serene. This was the first time I felt I was controlling the boundary, without needing to argue, without needing to plead. This silent action would let Sophie feel the consequences herself. A few hours later, Sophie came home. The door opened, and she saw everything. Her clothes, handbags, and suitcase soaked by the rain scattered on the porch, and the note with the cold message. Sophie stood there, confused, unsure whether to yell, cry, or say anything. For the first time, her eyes were no longer confident, no longer defiant. Instead, there was panic and surprise. She walked closer, her voice trembling. "Ethan, why did you do this?" I shrugged, my voice flat. "I already told you, I'm not your husband. I can't stop you from seeing anyone, but I will no longer act like an easygoing boyfriend." Sophie fell silent, her eyes blurred with rain and helplessness. I felt a strange power flow through me. Not anger, not vengeance, just the affirmation of my boundary. She understood that all her past disrespect had led to this consequence, and for the first time she felt the value of what I had sacrificed. I turned my back and walked into the house, leaving Sophie standing there in the rain. The sound of rain on the suitcase, the handbag, the soaked clothes seemed to emphasize a single message. Ethan had changed. Aunt Sophie, for the first time, had to confront his true coldness. A few days of silence after that rainy night. That's all I got, and I didn't witness the chaos outside directly. Everything was relayed to me by friends a few days later, but just hearing it was enough to make me smile to myself. My friends told me that Sophie returned home that evening with her suitcase, clothes, and handbags thoroughly soaked. In a panic, her hands trembling as she held her waterlogged belongings, she rushed over to Jack's house for help, hoping he would assist her. I smiled as I listened. Jack didn't bother to open the door, didn't answer his phone, and didn't even text her back. The person she had trusted the most, the one she thought would rescue her, ended up completely turning his back. Sophie had to bear the consequences alone. Soaked clothes, a damaged suitcase, waterlogged handbags, the items she once took pride in, were now just a chaotic mess. She pleaded, she begged for help, but no one was by her side. Karma arrived perfectly. Sophie had once disrespected me, and now she was being repaid by her own disrespect. As for Jack, the one who had interfered in another's relationship, his unreliable nature was now exposed, turning away when she needed him most. As my friends recounted the scene, the image of Sophie standing in the rain, soaked, her suitcase and clothes in her hands, eyes wide, trembling, confused. I couldn't help but laugh. She was so confident, so defiant towards me, and now she was utterly helpless. All her confidence, all her mockery, now dissolved in the rain and Jack's abandonment. After hearing the story, I sighed, feeling both satisfied and immensely peaceful spreading throughout my body. There was no need for yelling, no need for violent revenge. I had simply drawn a boundary, acted coldly, and karma took care of the rest. Everything unfolded perfectly, a costly lesson for both Sophie and Jack. From that day on, I knew I was no longer the easygoing person I used to be. I learned that love is not just about sacrifice or indulgence, but also about maintaining boundaries and protecting oneself. Sophie and Jack ultimately had to face the consequences, and me. I was free, self-governed, and perfectly satisfied. I smiled lightly, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat looking out the window. The rain was still falling, a reminder that sometimes karma doesn't require my direct intervention. All I needed was silence and firm boundaries, and the consequences would arrive on time. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt truly free and fulfilled. I realized that loving someone doesn't mean accepting being taken advantage of or being disrespected. This story also reminded me, sometimes silence, coldness, and maintaining boundaries are more powerful than all the arguments or pleading. It helped me reflect on myself, mature, and learn how to love while still respecting myself. Thank you all for listening to this story. If anyone has ever experienced the feeling of being taken advantage of or disrespected in a relationship, I hope my story can help you find the strength to hold your boundaries and respect yourselves. Life can be harsh, but we can always learn how to protect ourselves smartly and coldly when necessary.